On that brutal night of the snowstorm, the wind lashed like whips, and snow swirled into a blinding white. A single headlight suddenly flashed along the deserted highway. No one could have predicted that a daring act would bridge two opposing worlds in that life-or-death moment. The rough-hewn mechanic, his hands hardened by grease, braved the cold to dash out and rescue the unconscious driver. The powerful woman, a CEO of a renowned corporation, now found herself entirely dependent on the compassion of a stranger. Could a simple touch spark a miracle? The story begins at that moment when kindness spoke amid the tension. Stay tuned for the first chapter, where every second in each falling flake guides you through a chain of unexpected events. Don't look away. The secret behind the little wooden door will reveal why a humble act can alter fate. The blizzard struck without warning, its howl echoing through the pines like a lone scream across a white wasteland. On the narrow mountain pass cutting through the Rockies, Marco Alvarez's battered pickup crawled slowly around each slippery curve. Its dim, yellowed headlights carved a path through the thick snow, guiding the way through the blinding darkness. In the back, his daughter Lucia, 7 years old, curled up in a thin wool blanket, her delicate face pressed against the icy window. Marco glanced in the rearview mirror, his gaze softening. She was all that remained of him after his wife's death 3 years ago. They had just left the repair shop in town, where Marco worked nearly 12 hours a day to sustain their minimalist yet peaceful life. He only hoped to reach home before the snow sealed the road. But fate has its way of testing the heart. A faint light flickered beside the road, the emergency beacon of a stranded vehicle. Marco eased off the accelerator. A silver-white SUV was tilted to one side, half buried in snow, completely motionless. In that instant, he thought neither of danger nor of time. He killed the engine, told Lucia to lock the doors, and sprinted into the storm. The wind struck his face like icy needles, biting into his flesh. With cautious steps, he approached the SUV and rapped sharply on the driver's window. There was no response. Leaning in, he squinted through the frost-laden glass. A woman, blonde hair, an ashen face, slumped motionless at the wheel. Without another thought, Marco drew a crowbar from behind him, pried the door open, released the lock, and hauled her from the driver's seat. Her body was as cold as ice, her lips tinged blue, her breath as faint as morning mist. Marco wrapped his arms around her limp form and dashed back to his pickup, snow clinging heavily to his shoulders. Inside the cab, he laid her across the passenger seat and cranked the heater to full. Lucia sat behind, her eyes wide as she watched her father. "Dad, who is she?" she whispered. Marco pressed 2 fingers to the woman's wrist and murmured, "Someone who needs our help." Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the truck, a spark of warmth glowed, from the compassion of a stranger. The heater's warmth began to melt the snow clinging to the woman's hair and shoulders. Marco draped his heavy coat over her, never taking his eyes off the faint blush returning to her cheeks. He did not know who she was or why she was alone in the storm. But that did not matter. Sometimes, knowing someone needs you is enough to act. Lucia clutched her faded teddy bear and stole glances at the front. "Will she be okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry and curiosity. Marco glanced back and offered a gentle smile. "We'll do everything we can." The pickup pressed on through the heavy snowfall, Marco gripping the wheel firmly, silently praying the storm would ease so the 3 of them could reach the small wooden cabin hidden in the woods. With every passing minute, the woman's body seemed to grow less cold. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her first gaze was confusion, which then met Marco's weathered but earnest face. "Where am I?" she croaked. Marco spoke softly. "In my truck. You passed out on the road. I couldn't leave you there." The woman tried to sit up but immediately wavered. Marco steadied her by the shoulders. "Lie still. You're not well enough yet." After a moment of silence, she said, "My name is Evelyn. Thank you. If it weren't for you." Marco shook his head, interrupting gently. "No thanks needed. I just did what was right." The truck turned onto a narrow logging road leading into the forest. Beneath the whispering pines, the tin roof of a wooden cabin emerged, its doorway spilling warm yellow light. Lucia cheered. "We're home." Marco stopped the engine and carried Evelyn out of the seat. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her breathing weak but steady. The cabin was small and weathered, but inside lay a world of warmth. He set her on an armchair near the stove, fetched a thick knit blanket and a steaming bowl of soup. Lucia stood beside him and whispered, "You're as kind as Santa Claus." Marco chuckled and tousled his daughter's hair. That night, amid the howling wind and swirling snow, 3 strangers shared one roof. No words were needed. Their eyes spoke volumes. Perhaps miracles do not come from magic, but from the quiet kindness of everyday life. The next morning, the sun rose slowly behind the snow-laden trees, casting pale rays through the frosted window. Inside the small cabin, the crackling of fire in the stove formed the soundtrack to a morning of healing and quiet. Evelyn awakened, looking around in confusion, her eyes settling on a small wooden table bearing toast and a steaming cup of tea. Marco stood by the hearth, sleeves rolled up, preparing breakfast. Lucia sat at the table, busily sketching in bright markers. "You're awake?" Marco turned, his tone calm yet warm. Evelyn nodded and tried to sit up. "I've troubled you and your daughter so much." Marco placed the skillet down and wiped his hands on his apron. "You haven't troubled us at all. Here, when someone needs help, we help, no reason required." Evelyn looked at him in silence. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken such a simple, kind sentence to her. In her world, where contracts, prejudice, and self-interest intertwined, kindness was often bartered or met with suspicion. Lucia ran over, offering Evelyn a scribbled drawing of 3 figures standing before the cabin beneath a star-filled sky. With scrawled words, "You're friends with Dad and me." Evelyn accepted it, tears forming in her eyes. "What a sweet child." Marco smiled. "She grew up in the snow, but she has a very warm heart." Evelyn surveyed the cabin, simple, rustic, yet every corner overflowed with love and devotion. No lavish furnishings or special conditions, just enough warmth so no one felt lost. "You never asked who I am, what I do, or what I have to offer in return," Evelyn observed. Marco shrugged. "I figured, people don't need a resume to be saved." Evelyn chuckled softly, the first genuine, unforced smile in days. "I am Evelyn March, CEO of March Tech Group." Marco looked up, unsurprised. "You're a person first. Titles come later. After the storm and the dawn. We are no longer strangers. You are not just the fortunate woman who survived. And I am not merely the anonymous mechanic in the blizzard. We are human, connected by compassion. Sometimes you don't need to know who someone is. You only need to know they deserve to be seen. And sometimes, an old wooden cabin is the most profound place of healing you will ever enter." Late that afternoon, the sky began to shed snow once more, though less fierce than the night before. Gentle white flakes settled on the porch like a reminder. The cold still lingered. Evelyn sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, her gaze tracing the falling snow with thoughts too heavy for words. Marco quietly tightened a loose screw on a wall-mounted lamp. He said little, only casting occasional glances at Evelyn to ensure she was all right. No words were needed. His presence brought a sense of safety, something Evelyn had long forgotten amid years of data, contracts, and corridors of power. "Have you ever wondered what kind of person you thought I was?" Evelyn suddenly asked. Marco looked up, slightly surprised. "I never guessed. I only saw a woman collapsed in the storm who needed help." That honest, non-judgmental answer unsettled Evelyn. She was accustomed to critical glances, polite nods, and insincere smiles. Marco, by contrast, did not care how many shares she held or how many boardrooms she ruled. "People see me as strong, cold, ambitious, perhaps because I had to be to survive in my world." Marco nodded. "I understand, but sometimes, people become strong because no one gave them the right to be weak." Silence fell. Evelyn turned away, hiding tear-bright eyes. Marco rose, walked over, and offered his hand. "You can start over anytime. Not with the world, but with yourself." Evelyn looked at that hand, rough, calloused, yet warm, and placed her trembling hand in his. In the heart of winter, that touch transmitted more than heat, it conveyed recognition. Not for CEO March, but for Evelyn, the human being. Just then, Lucia burst in, breaking the solemn air with a radiant grin. "Aunt Evelyn, I made cookies. Want some?" Evelyn laughed, nodding. "Yes, please, I'm hungry." In that moment, a miracle occurred. Within that humble cabin, Prejudice melted away in a child's smile and a silent handshake. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside, Evelyn felt the gentle stirrings of spring at her doorstep. A week had passed since that fateful night. Evelyn had grown accustomed to the simple rhythm of life in Marco's cottage. Morning brought the crackle of wood in the stove and Lucia's laughter as she practiced her letters. There were no meetings, no piles of contracts, no email reports, only the hush needed to hear one's heartbeat. Marco still went to work at the local garage, his old pickup cutting through the morning fog as steadfastly as ever. Evelyn stayed behind with Lucia, reading books, cooking, and occasionally mending an old sweater, things she had never imagined doing, let alone enjoying. One afternoon, as the snow began to melt on the porch, Evelyn opened the laptop Marco had helped her recharge. Her inbox overflowed with messages from assistants, partners, and the press, countless inquiries about the sudden disappearance of CEO March. Yet Evelyn did not reply. Not a single line. She was not fleeing, she was reflecting. That night, after Lucia had gone to sleep, Evelyn sat by the fire with Marco. I used to think if I stopped working even for a day, the world would collapse, she said softly, her gaze pensive. Marco did not interrupt, he let her speak on. But now, everything is still fine. Maybe, I built an empire and forgot to build a place for myself. Marco nodded and poured more tea into a slightly chipped mug. Sometimes you have to lose your way to find your map. Evelyn let out a genuine laugh, a laugh without pretense. The next morning, she left the house earlier than usual and walked to the local elementary school where Lucia studied. She sat in the hallway, watching children laughing and running, teachers patiently guiding and listening. No one knew who she was. No one saw her as a symbol of power. They only saw a woman quietly observing with gentle eyes. That afternoon, Evelyn returned with a decision. She opened her computer and drafted a brief email. Not a resignation, nor an explanation, just a new plan. To focus on community education and support for underprivileged children. A small scholarship fund to start. Named after Marco's mother, whom Evelyn had never met but had heard once taught village children before there was a school. When Marco read the draft, he simply asked, "Are you sure?" Evelyn nodded without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I feel this is right." Outside, snow began to fall again. But within that house, a new door had opened. One leading not back to a glamorous world, but forward to something more genuine and profound. Evelyn was no longer a woman who needed to be strong just to survive. She was a woman who had chosen to live true to her heart. At dawn one day, sunlight filtered through the trees and gently touched the thin snow. Marco and Evelyn stood before the wooden doors of the small community center where they would launch the scholarship fund for children in need. The scene was modest yet full of hope. Rows of neatly arranged chairs. A banner hand-painted by Lucia reading, "Nurturing Futures," and the eager faces of local volunteers. Evelyn looked around, her heart fluttering with excitement and joy. She squeezed Marco's hand, a silent gesture of gratitude. Marco smiled, pride shining in his eyes. They needed no more words to understand that this was the fruit of an extraordinary journey. From a cabin in the blizzard to a doorway opening to a brighter future for many young lives. The microphone crackled, and Evelyn stepped onto the podium. Her voice rang clear and inspiring. "We believe in fragile dreams and the perseverance to overcome adversity. The Nurturing Futures Fund is born not just to award scholarships, but to sow seeds of hope and solidarity." The audience sat in rapt silence before breaking into warm applause. Lucia turned to Marco, her eyes shining, as if to say, "I'm proud of you, Dad." After the launch, many parents came forward to share their stories. A young mother choked up describing her son's congenital heart condition and his hunger for education. An elderly teacher grew emotional recalling children in a neighboring village who had never seen a proper school. Each story served as a reminder of the power of kindness and communal responsibility. Evelyn listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in her notebook, her eyes alight with determination to refine the program. Late that afternoon, once everything had settled, Marco and Evelyn settled by a small window in the center. Beneath the warm glow of a lamp, they shared a cup of hot tea and a few slices of bread. Outside, dark clouds gathered, hinting at another snowfall. Yet in the hush of the room, they felt the power of compassion and resolve. Evelyn whispered, You see, in giving, we receive something priceless. Marco nodded, his gaze unwavering. As long as belief remains, no matter how bitter the cold, we can keep the flame of hope alive. Amid the long winter, they knew the road ahead held many challenges: operating the fund, building partnerships, spreading their message. But now, the connection of hearts had forged a new energy strong enough to weather any storm. And at that moment, Marco realized, kindness does more than transform one bitter winter's night. It unlocks the door to a radiant future. Morning mist curled gently across the center's porch, dissipating as the first golden rays of day slipped through the doorway. The harsh winter had passed, yielding to warmer skies and a fresh beginning. Marco Alvarez stepped outside, breathing deeply of the crisp air tinged with thawing snow. In the distance, a slender fir tree had sprouted new green buds, proof that life endures beyond the freeze. Evelyn March leaned against the wooden railing, her gaze soft on the little cabin, the place where all transformation began. She smiled, brushing dew-damp hair from her brow. She recalled the first night she awoke in that storm-battered cabin, forgetting her savior's name and unsure where her life would lead. Now, with her heart awakened, she no longer feared challenges in the corporate world. She had learned life's greatest lesson. Kindness is not a weakness but the purest form of strength. At MarchTech's headquarters, news of the Nurturing Futures Fund spread like a warm flame. Partners, investors, and staff were astonished that a young, powerful CEO would devote hours each week to meeting students, sharing stories, and listening to their hopes. Evelyn launched corporate compassion tours, sending executives into communities to act rather than just talk. Scholarship applications tripled, yet what brought her the greatest joy was not the numbers but the hopeful eyes of children who had never before held a pen to write their dreams. Meanwhile, Marco was no longer toiling alone under the garage lifts day and night. He was appointed technical advisor for the mechanic training program at Whitmore Automotive Group, where Evelyn partnered with Juliana Whitmore, the late CEO's sister, to build a new training center in Helena. Each morning when he arrived, he saw eager apprentices not only learning to dismantle engines but also absorbing the virtues of dedication, responsibility, and perseverance from Marco's story. Lucia, the 7-year-old who once clung to a thin blanket, had become the scholarship fund's little ambassador. At a weekend sharing event, she held the microphone confidently. I think everyone has a spark inside. When we share it, that spark lights not only our path but the hearts of others. The audience erupted in applause. And in that moment, Marco, both father and mechanic, felt a pride surpassing any accolade. Their story was not merely the journey of a powerful woman and a resilient mechanic, but a testament to the ripple effect of generosity. When a single act of kindness is sown, it does not end with give and take, it ignites a chain of benevolent actions, forging strangers into a united community. Every scholarship awarded, every skill taught, every small step by Lucia, all contributed to building a world less cold and less lonely. And now, as the first spring timidly knocked on the Rockies' peaks, Marco and Evelyn stood side by side, not merely as savior and saved, but as partners in a shared mission, spreading humanity where cold once reigned. They understood that the story had no final ending, for life weaves endless surprises, joys, and trials, yet they believed that with enough compassion to prompt action, no matter how rugged the road ahead, we can continue on with unwavering resolve. Let this story serve as a reminder. Each day is an opportunity to do good, no matter how small, and when we open our hearts to share warmth, we find ourselves warmed by the flame of hope and connection. Thank you for journeying with Marco, Evelyn, and Lucia. If you feel inspired, please share this story, spread its message, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to discover more meaningful tales.